the adoption of circular business models widespread by the industry has to happen. It will happen, in the same way where 10 years ago we were talking about luxury brands selling direct to consumers on websites was fairly novel, right?
And look at us now.
Look at us now. Some of the best web experiences and digital experiences are being driven by luxury brands themselves. And so, I know it will happen. And some days it just feels a long way off. But for us, and in terms of our Cocoon and the business, that's going to be a real game changer for us.
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of a Leader show with me, Maria Vorostovsky. I'm the founder and CEO of HVO Search. Founders, CEOs, and lone HR directors hire me when they feel stuck and under pressure to hire the right senior leaders who will grow their companies. They work with me to ensure they don't hire the wrong person. I'm on a mission to discover what makes a great leader, the skills they have, what drives them, to really dissect what success looks like and what it takes to get to the very top. My aim is to bring to you leadership stories of entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs, investors, authors, leaders from all walks of life, the failures they faced, what they wish they knew before they started, and the hurdles they had to overcome. If you want to be inspired, surprised, and feel like you're not alone in your struggles towards the very top, you're in the right place here on Anatomy of a Leader. Like and comment below and subscribe to make sure you don't miss a single episode. It will change the way you think and may even change your life. In episode 11, I spoke with Ceanne Fernandes-Wong about co-founding and leading her company Cocoon, a luxury handbag subscription service. We talked about doing impossible things like leading the way in creating circularity in fashion, starting a business just before a pandemic, and yet securing a powerful investor like Kering, a global luxury giant. Of course, we talked about balancing motherhood and running a business, and how it's only women that get asked this. We talked about vulnerability in leadership, having great advisors that can open your mind, and the differences in hiring between established companies like Net-a-Porter and startups. Ceanne is smart, unassuming, and so humble. Well, listen to the full episode number 11 and discover it for yourself. Ceanne, thank you so much for joining Anatomy of a Leader. Thank you so much for coming to my home, to the studio, and such a pleasure to meet you. We've obviously spoken on the phone,
Yes,
but haven't had the chance to meet face to face. So this
Yes.
is a fantastic opportunity.
Yes,
Thank
well,
you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to get out and obviously come to your home, and to be able to do it face to face is breath of fresh air.
A rare opportunity these days. I know it's like we got so used to sort of going out there and sort of, having coffees and not having had that during the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's definitely wonderful to start doing that again. Well, on the show, we talk about leadership and personal journeys and, when we're talking to CEOs and founders, and I'm just so curious about you. I know we've just been kind of chatting just before we started, and it's wonderful to learn a little bit more about you. But, well, you're the founder of Cocoon,
Yes.
which is a luxury handbag subscription service.
Yes.
I got that right this
Yes.
time. And well, tell me about this. How did that come about? Why did you decide to do this business?
So I've been in fashion tech really for the vast majority of my career, and I've always, especially for the last almost 12 years now, focused primarily on disruptive businesses in tech. So businesses that are doing something slightly different and bucking the trend. And that's a place I really like to be. Mm-hmm. And so I'd been at Vestiaire Collective, and I had been traveling between London and Paris, so splitting my week between the two. And that was becoming unsustainable just on a personal front. And that was really tricky. So I knew that the next role that I wanted would need to be based in London, but also I was really at the point where I'd done quite a few things. I'd built several businesses. I knew that building something was a place that I enjoyed. I'd launched businesses within other businesses. And I'd worked in scale-ups, and I'd always said that I wasn't going to do a true startup unless it was mine. And obviously Cocoon is not wholly mine, but I didn't want to, because I knew what it was to launch a business within a business, and I knew that doing a startup would have even more challenges associated with it. And so I wanted to make sure that by the time I did it, I was ready to do it, and also that I was going to get out what I was going to be putting in. The other thing is obviously the sustainable and circular part of fashion is something that's incredibly important to me, and I very much didn't want to get involved in a business that didn't have those values. And so I was introduced to my co-founder Matt, and I was introduced to him just as he was really starting to formulate this idea. And Vanessa, who's the founder of the Restory, said to me, "Oh, I know this gentleman called Matt, and you should meet him. And I think, he's got this idea, but you would bring the know-how of how to bring it to life." And so we met in February of 2019. I joined the business in August 2019, and then we launched officially in November 2019 also, 3 short months before the pandemic hit.
Always a great time to start a business, just before a pandemic. Yes. Amazing.
So, and so Cocoon's point of difference is that we are very much a handbag subscription service. We focus predominantly on top tier luxury, and our focus is, rather than a one-off rental occasion, but developing a long-term relationship with the customer. So really thinking about how we can tap into a woman's wardrobe, and this idea of bringing them our collection instead of what they have in their wardrobe, and they can really feel that our collection is part of their own closet. We want our edit to be the dream selection. So if you had a wish list of what could you do, what could you have? So we have new season, we have vintage, we have past season classics. We really want someone to feel like this is the best handbag wardrobe you could ever want. So, and be able to tap into that. The other thing for me is I love businesses that, when we say this word disruptive, and what does that actually mean? I love businesses that are challenging the status quo. That's a theme that runs throughout my own life, but also in the businesses that I've worked in, and being able to do that in a way that is respectful of the luxury codes and the luxury industry is a really interesting space to play in, because I think some people get it right and some people don't. And so that was something that I've worked hard to bring to Cocoon, and that's why when you see the edit that we have and the way we position ourselves, it's really about appreciating the luxury space, as well as presenting a really amazing service for women or men. We have a mix.
I've been thinking about the concept of ownership, owning things, and I wonder how much the pandemic has shifted people's, well, particularly women's minds, because you have all these things in your closet and you don't necessarily wear them, or they're just sort of at the back of the cupboard and maybe they're not quite so fresh. And we're just, been conditioned to have this newness all the time. And on the one hand, you want to have pieces that you might want to wear for years and years and years. But from my personal experience, I don't necessarily know what exactly the items that I bought like 20 years ago, I might not love them anymore. It's like hard to anticipate what that would be. And I was just thinking about the concept of rental and having that kind of newness on an ongoing basis. And I wonder if in the future we don't own anything, like even like homes that you can just go and stay somewhere, and you want to have a particular look for that month or season or whatever, and not actually having to constantly buy. And how much better would that be for the environment?
I think it's I think there's two things. I think there will be things that you do want to own. And I have a daughter who's old enough now, and she's already going, Mummy, I really want you to keep that. And I really want that. And, and that idea of keeping things. I think the other thing is the pandemic, I think, has really accelerated the opportunity for rental because we have been stuck inside our homes. We have so many people have sold what they have had, which is partly something that's really helped the rise of resale. But we have realized we don't need as much stuff around us all the time. And certainly I don't want to necessarily have more bags. I've worked in the luxury industry for many years now. And I've been very fortunate to have access to a lot of beautiful items, but I don't necessarily need
have them all in your closet.
I don't need 5 or 10 more handbags in my wardrobe anymore. And so there is that. The other thing is the desire for newness and freshness is not going to go away. It's it's
a dopamine hit you get every time there's something new comes along, and it's like shiny,
exactly.
amazing.
and so how do you balance it out? How do you do that in a responsible way? How do you want something new and fresh without necessarily having such a negative impact on the planet? The other fantastic thing about handbags is they're not size based, so that's in our benefit as a business. You can be wearing your sweats and have a beautiful handbag, and it can make you feel put together, as much as you can have this idea of I'm going to wear my grandmother's smock and put on a very modern handbag and do this idea of mixing and matching. So that's why personally I love handbags. The rental of clothing has its own set of challenges in terms of high cost of dry cleaning and that sort of thing, which has a different impact. For us, handbags sit in a sweet spot because the durability and the quality of the product really works well in our market. So we're not as worried about items aren't getting damaged as perhaps they might be if it was a dress that was being worn. And then also they're fairly timeless, right? A lot of brands have a large selection of continuity product. Certain styles will not just be for a season, they'll be iterated over several seasons. And that all works well when it comes to why luxury handbags are a really great rental item. We haven't solved all the problems yet. I think that you will absolutely have items that you keep and items that you rent, and I think that will be a very normal way of us progressing. And I think just as resale is a very normal and way of purchasing items and clearing out your wardrobe, we will be thinking about this is how we purchase directly from brands. This is how the part of our wardrobe and where we are willing to go and purchase secondhand, and then this is what we rent. There'll be items that you'll never need to rent or never want to rent, of course, but how we fit into those various categories into our lives will be just so much part and parcel. It won't be a niche area.
I love the fact that the pandemic has had some positive impact on the fashion industry as a whole, because, this is some steps towards creating some kind of circularity within the fashion space, because we can't continue just piling things, not just in our closets, but also in the landfills and wherever, so providing a new, fresh life or a piece of clothing or handbag or accessory, it's a step in the right direction. So congratulations on the investment from Kering as well.
Yes,
so that's really
much.
amazing news. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say we're very fortunate to have them as a partner. I would hope that they feel the same way too. We started speaking to them fairly soon after I joined the business, and we were very early on, and we kept that relationship going and that communication. Obviously, the fact that we're luxury handbags and they just have such an incredible stable of brands within their group, has meant that it was a very natural collaboration in that regard. So the investment is with the Kering Group directly, as opposed to with the brands. The brands aren't mandated to work with us; they choose to, and that in and of itself is fantastic that they are choosing to work with us, and so we're very much at the start of that journey, and we announced the deal a month ago, thereabouts. And so we're just starting to look at all the data and analyze how things have been trending since we started working with them. And so it's just such an exciting partnership to have on board. They're not the only investor. We also had Simon Beckerman, who's the founder of Depop. I speak to him regularly. He's a fantastic person to have on board. He's just so creative. So we're very fortunate to have people who really care deeply about our business on board in terms of investors and advisors, and can help bring their knowledge and experience in terms of helping to move the business forward and helping us to realize our vision, which has been so positive overall.
It's never about the money. Well, I mean, it is about the money to extent, because it helps you to build your team and, look for other opportunities. But actually, it's the people who make that happen, and the knowledge and the expertise and the connections. I mean, what's the biggest impact for the business having such investment and having these people on board?
So I think it's been really interesting, because having been in business and had my own network and coming in, I think when you are fundraising, it is such an important part of being a founder and being the CEO of a startup. And it's knowing that you bring a certain amount to the table with your experience and what you're building, and whether it's your previous experience or the experience that you have in terms of what you're doing. But a lot of what our investors and these advisors do is help open doors. They help grease the wheels. They help set you up in terms of getting you in a room that you might not have been able to get to, not because of your background, but because people might think, oh, you're a small startup, or you are... I might not be ready to have that conversation yet, right? And that, I think, is something that is, and that's where they can be very, very helpful. And also, being a startup founder and CEO is very hard, in a way that it's very different if it's not your business. And so I have advisors who I just like to speak to, because they help keep me sane, and we sort of have, yes, we'll talk about the business, but I have one particular advisor. I ask him so many questions about his business, just because it helps get me out of what I'm thinking on in a day-to-day, and helps open my mind a little bit more. And therefore, by the time I get off the phone with him, we've spoken about everything from organic wine to how he's thinking about his new UX hire. And actually, I can take that headspace back with me, but also just in terms of, okay, well, actually, if he's finding it hard in terms of hiring that particular role, how does that impact what I'm doing here? So I find all of those conversations so helpful, even if it's just giving me 5 minutes away from...
It makes all the difference, It's like we're talking about leadership and being at the top, and it can be lonely at the top with having to handle so much pressure and having to make all of those decisions, and having those conversations on a regular basis just to feel heard and understood, and also to take you out of that kind of like the thinking when you're kind of, stuck or low, and to have another perspective, another angle. And it's invaluable.
Yeah. And I think that idea of, luckily for me, I've progressed within my career where I've become more and more senior. And as you become more and more senior, you do have less peers and also less confidence along the way. So going from my previous role into this role wasn't as it was different, of course, but I felt there was progression, so it wasn't a total shock to the system.
Yeah.
But also, it is really different because you do have to be so much more careful about what you say and who you confide in, because, and this is the same thing, whether you're managing a team of 10 or you're running a startup or whatever, how and what you say impacts everybody so much, and so you can very quickly change everybody's perception about an individual or about a situation, depending on how you react to it. So that is one of the things that you have to be so conscious of, how you present yourself. And you know, when you've asked me, like, what does leadership mean? It's so much part of that. Yes, it's about making the tough decisions. It's about the loneliness, but it's also about how you show up and trying to not show when you are stressed, or if there is someone in the team who's probably not pulling their weight, and how do you mediate between all of that? Because if you show that too much, you can also start to create divisions, especially when it's a small team.
It's hard though, isn't it, when you're having to be the strong one for everyone else because they look to you to make the decisions and to say that, yes, everything is going to be okay.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we're talking to Whitney, it's like, well, who is going to tell me that everything is going to be okay? And I think that idea of just, you know, being there and having to kind of hold it is, I think, is incredibly challenging.
It is incredibly challenging. And I would say we saw that in extremes over the past 18 months to, you know, having that, you know, when you're coupled with everybody going through this big situation, and you'd have team members phoning you and saying, I didn't sleep last night, I'm so stressed about the whole thing. And you have to balance all of that and try and get everybody to show up at work. And how do you foster that team spirit? One of the things that we did automatically was daily Zoom stand-ups. We all start a day, and some days we talk about work, and other days we talk about what we watched on TV or Netflix, you know, just trying to bring those water cooler moments in a virtual way. And that really helped us as a team, just to have that 15 minutes in person, you know, FaceTime with each other in the morning, really helped the team just sort of pull together and push through. But it's really challenging, because you have this idea of being that face where you know, and you can't turn around and say, oh, can you believe that X, Y, and Z happened? And, you know, especially when you go through, for example, a fundraising round, there is always going to be things that delay the process. And there is always going to be moments when you when you doubt that you're going to get through to the other side. And that's when I'm fortunate I have a co-founder, when, you know, and that we are able to, in those dark moments, go, it's going to be okay, right? It's
support each other.
Support each other.
Yeah.
You know, and also, you know, when you have those moments of going, I'm really annoyed that X has happened, and we can either have a conversation about that, or we can just say we are where we are and move forward. And we chose the latter, in terms of, you know, so it's how also you can do that. And for me, Matt and I have different roles within the business, and he is far more involved in the fundraising side and sort of the strategic initiative, and I run the business. So we have that division, and that's helpful. But also, even if it's just going, you know, what's going on? How are you doing? Going, actually pretty crappy because X, Y, and Z happened.
Yeah.
You know, and being able to say that is helpful, because you can't necessarily.
So is there a place for vulnerability in leadership?
I think there has to be. And I've come to that conclusion over time, in the sense that I grew up thinking, I never had a female boss for my first 10 years of working.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I never saw what a strong female woman looked like in business. And I had some pretty atrocious bosses too. And so the first time I saw that, I was like, wow, that's what it looks like. And so, and she did it with calmness and grace. And,
Who are you talking about?
her name's Julia Jordan.
Okay.
She is, she's now very senior. She's in advertising and media. And I actually wrote to her a few years ago, and I said, I'm just dropping you a line to say, I know I only worked with you for sort of just shy of a year or whatever it was, but you had such an impact. You were the first female leader I saw. And she was a bit like, okay, thank you.
Mark Goulston, who I also interviewed, he would call that a power thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it's so important to let people know the impact that they've had, because I hadn't seen that. And it then took me, and then I joined the Net-a-Porter group in 2009, and I saw so many women working in senior levels who all had different ways of working. And I'm not saying they were all perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but that was the first time I'd worked in such a highly dominated female environment. And I thought it was fantastic, right? It's interesting because obviously the gender balance was higher in tech and finance, and, less so in marketing and all that sort of thing. And at Cocoon, actually, we're an all-female team. Other than Matt, my co-founder, I have an all-female team, and it's just been something that's happened organically.
Yeah, it's just there's just not enough female role models. And when I hear stories about any kind of, early experiences, and when you've worked with somebody who inspired you, or just seeing that it's possible how it's done, and it doesn't have to be perfect, like you were saying, but just needs to be there so you can also see yourself in those people.
I think absolutely. Somebody said something to me, or I heard it said, and I hadn't thought of it in that way. And I say it so much now. But the idea of you need to see it in order to be it, right? And when I think about my career journey, I had always known I wanted to own and run a business, and that was really clear. But I didn't think I'd do it in London, firstly, and because I wasn't planning on being in London long term, I wasn't thinking, okay, this is what I need to do in order to be successful here. However, the idea of, like I said, not having had a female boss in a senior leadership position until at least 10 years into my career was something that I only realized how important it was once I had it, because there is a slightly different way that men and women approach things, for better or for worse. And I think we can, learn a lot from the way men approach things, because sometimes we get too caught up in ourselves. We think we need to be perfect, and certainly a lot of men don't think they need to be. They're just like, of course I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, why wouldn't I? And so there's that. And I think also the idea that when you also start to add motherhood into it, and how do you balance having a career with motherhood? Because unfortunately, a lot of the times, there is still this notion of you have to work as though you're not a mother, and be a mother as though you don't work. And it's going to take a lot. And unfortunately, even people who don't mean to perpetuate that myth still do. And I think as business owners and business leaders, it's how we also show up. And I mentioned I had no childcare, and I had to bring my daughter to work, and it's fine, because I think it's important for her to also see that there are women in the workplace. and doing that at a certain level. But I think that you have to normalize life. And I worked in a business for many years that I loved very dearly, but I worked 50-hour weeks. I worked so hard, and it was really the sense of presenteeism and the idea. I used to leave the office no earlier than 8 p.m. pretty much every day. And so how can you do that when you do have a child? And certainly I felt impacted when I did have a child, and I had to then leave early because there was the sense of this is how you should be working. And so I think it's important to
have examples of it.
have examples.
I'm so with you. I mean, I didn't really realize that there was a gender bias until I had kids, or at least I probably ignored it and felt, no, it's, we live in the modern world, it doesn't really affect me. But only when I had children. And my husband's in the room, so he's listening to what we're saying. But the majority of the time, the childcare falls to women. And unfortunately, when you have been working in a male-dominated world, even if you're working within fashion, let's face it, most senior leadership is still male, and you don't have that example because men have got used to having somebody who is taking care of the childcare, the household duties, where you don't need to bring that to work because you're being allowed to give in that freedom. So as women are entering but still have the expectations to do that, and this is where the problem lies, because you cannot do those, grueling hours because you're going home and you're doing another job at the end of it. And then you're saying bringing, your children to work. Well, men didn't have to do that because someone else was doing that.
Exactly.
There.
And I think, it's how do you work around your children and your life and everything else? And sometimes it can feel like you're permanently working because you go to work and then you come home and you deal with your kids and then you get back to work. But there's two things, and I think there's been a lot of debate about this idea of like a mother who's is she a female boss, or is she a mum entrepreneur kind of thing? And for me personally, I think it's you have to celebrate it because there are hurdles that you're getting over in order to achieve that. But at the same time, it still really, really irks me because no one is sitting there, and you would never ask a man, how many kids do you have? How do you balance your life with your kids? Because it's assumed that there's something else. And I joke around, I've got some friends who are stay-at-home mums, and I've got friends who, and generally those who are stay-at-home mums, not all, but a few of them have husbands who are doing very big jobs, and so that's why it works for their life. However, with my friends who are in very senior leadership positions, sometimes we say, I need a wife. I need, that concept of what...
I've heard that been said so many times,
exactly.
For sure, yeah.
And certainly there is this idea of, I know when I was traveling and I was living between, and even before I joined Vestiaire, when I was at the Net-a-Porter Group, and certainly when I was at Kate Spade, all of those roles had me traveling. And I was only able to do that because I had full-time help at home. Now my daughter's older, and so my needs are different and her needs are different. But there is just also this idea that you can have it all and do it all. You can only do that if you have help, and that help has to come in the sense of a supportive partner or outsourced help. And but even like you say, there's this idea of, and I'm very fortunate, my husband's very supportive, and we try and balance childcare between the two of us. But there's also okay, where is she going to go for summer camp? That's going to fall on me. How are we going to balance the summer of, however long, 2 months of no childcare? So when you take that and you fit that into the rest of your working life, it becomes another thing that you need to deal with. But unfortunately, fortunately, it's just another string to your bow at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think this idea of destigmatizing childcare, that it's somehow like, not important work, not valuable, and for men to feel that it's actually, you're contributing to a family, you're contributing to humans that are going to be, the next generation of employees. I mean, let's make it even like more sort of transactional and commercial. And having a supportive ecosystem around you in the shape of partners, family, friends, schools, governments, everything is so key. And I think we're still not there when it comes to supporting women. And when you're talking about, it's like, female CEO, I actually wrote a post about it because I saw something, a post, and it's like, I'm a female CEO with the word female crossed out. And I was thinking, well, on the one hand, yes, it's still, gender biased because we should just be CEOs. But on the other hand, it's drawing attention to the fact that there is a person who is female, who is a CEO, to be that role model so you can be her, to see yourself represented. And then when you're talking about, what was helpful for you, having investment and having the different perspectives, like we need diversity of thought, of culture, of gender, of, everything, to be able to see the different perspectives and to actually, take us out of ourselves. It's so key.
It's so important because even just, and I would say I've had so many different experiences, even whether it's fundraising or sitting in the room as a woman. And I had a boss who, to your exact point, I don't believe him to have a gender bias at all, right? However, he would absolutely expect you to work as though you did not have children, right? And so just inherent in that, he would expect you to be working as though you didn't have a life outside of the office. And so I think that in part, yes, we need this supportive network outside, but we also need a supportive network in the workplace. And it's tricky because before you have kids, as a woman, like you said, you didn't realize the gender bias. But then the other thing you don't realize is there becomes this little bit of, I'm working so hard, and so who's now got kids gets to leave at 5, and therefore isn't, of course, I should be compensated better because I'm working harder. And I don't have the answer for that, but that's a different level of trickiness that does exist. And certainly I saw it in other women. And before I had my daughter, it was really interesting because, as I said, workplace with a lot of women, but anyone who did have a child and when they came back to work, they used to make a big point of talking about how much more efficient they were now that they had kids because they had to really prioritize. And part of that was very much establishing a narrative about don't discount me because I have a child. And they felt that they had to really reiterate that. And certainly it was a challenge for me especially when I first had my daughter, because there was this, you are leaving, what? You want to leave at 5:30 sort of thing. And so that was a bit of a challenge. But I think what I've tried to do at Cocoon is really say, you need to be working, the hours that are allocated to you. You've got to figure out how to get your job done. If those hours, depending on what your role is, of course, because if your role is about being in the warehouse at 9 a.m. in order to get the bags out, there is just, there's unfortunately...
It kind of goes with the job.
The job.
You can't allow that kind of flexibility.
Exactly. However, alongside that, there has to be a space where you have to be able to talk about the fact that I have something, doctor's appointments or this or that. But also, if you are routinely having to work till midnight every night, then that's a conversation that the business needs to be having, because either, unfortunately, you're not very effective at your job, or there is just
there's a disconnect between what is possible and what is expected. I mean, we all want to do a good job, but at the end of the day, if you're having to put in so many hours, and I mean, I definitely not a fan of not sleeping. I think you don't perform very well. And if you're routinely doing that, then there is definitely an issue within the organization, because the expectations are you just, squeeze as much out with no concern about what happens to the individual or the longevity of that.
Exactly. And I think I work very hard, and I always have. And I think it's, is it a South African thing, or is it just an individual thing? Like the idea that you do the job until the job gets done is very much part and parcel. And I probably can and have and do take that notion too far of, of really pushing myself. And that's probably one of the reasons why Cocoon has been able to grow, even despite there being a pandemic and despite all of the challenges that you have as a startup. However, I really emphasize the point of you have to take a week, like at least your weekends, right? And I've had bosses, and unfortunately they've all been male bosses for whatever reason, just happened to be. I had one who would expect everybody to be on email on a Sunday night, and expect to, be having email chats ahead of the Monday morning start. I've had one who is a bit of a, taking another holiday kind of thing. And I've had others who go on holiday and work the entire time and therefore expect you to do the same thing. And for me, I think that is so dangerous. And I've said to my team, I'm going to say this slightly selfishly, you're of no use to me if you burn out. Like, it's really important for you to recharge your batteries. It's really important for you as a person, but also it's really important for us as a team and as a business. You cannot show up and do your job properly or be the right colleague to whoever else you have to deal with if you are exhausted. So if you are working 7 days a week or even 6 days a week, or you're working till midnight and continuously and you're never taking your time off, that is going to be a problem, because it's short-term gain for long-term pain, unfortunately.
It's a vicious circle.
Very much so.
Because when you're exhausted, things take longer. You're easily distracted. And we know that being distracted just costs you a lot in terms of your IQ points, but also in how long it actually takes you to get back into getting that momentum. So if you're not routine, you're not sleeping, you're not taking holidays, you're going to have to stay till midnight because it takes you 3 hours just to get something, kind of like off the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like all of these things are, you have to model, like culture comes from the top.
Yeah.
You have to model the behavior.
And it is really hard because as someone who's leading a small business, you know that you have to emulate the behavior. So you have to make sure that people see what good looks like from you. So you do make sure you work hard and you put the hours in and all that sort of thing. Because you need to show them what that looks like, but also because like every single startup, you're always, there are things that happen and your business has a growth spurt and things change and you're like, we needed 3 people on that and we have 1 because we didn't know that growth spurt would happen in that short space of time versus we planned for it in 3 months and that happened in 3 weeks kind of thing. And so there is always going to be that extra time and that balance of making sure that I, as a founder and CEO, take the time out myself, as well as showing the team what that looks like. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
I think it's probably one that most founders struggle with. And also, I think, when you look at startups, the nature of the beast is, and it's a bit of unfortunately, one of those things where people say, I've had so many potential investors or people say, we'll just hire in, a few people with no experience and, work them really hard and then you'll get your business up to the next level. And I think that's also an inefficient way of doing things because you spend so much time training people up. And so there's a balance between bringing the right level of experience in with managing that from a financial standpoint of bringing in sort of cheaper talent.
It's not just, but you can't just bring people and just expect them to know everything, and especially if it's at a more junior level. So the time that you invest into training them and explaining that, you could be doing, you can be spending your time in other ways.
Exactly.
Actually, let's talk about sort of hiring for a startup.
Yep.
And maybe even comparing it, because you were with SDR Collective before, Net-a-Porter, you've worked for brands that, especially Net-a-Porter, which are more established. Like, what's the difference? Like,
it is, I think there's so many differences. It's been so interesting to me just seeing, I wish almost I could be a fly on the wall in terms of and tell the story sometimes, because when I was at the Net-a-Porter group and I joined in 2009 and I joined the team to launch the Outnet, and I was employee number 3, and I hired they had hired my first hire because they were trying to hire as many people as fast as possible to get the team up off the ground. And so Laura started 2 weeks after me. She was with me for the entire time. But then after that, it was up to me to hire the full rest of the team. And by the time I left, the team were about 30 people. We're more in a scale-up stage, headquartered in Paris, but with teams spread around Europe. And so that was slightly different because of how the team was set up, and I know a lot about French employment law now, but that was slightly different because a younger business, but a really growing business, and therefore we were able to attract a lot of top talent. Cocoon has been so different in regards to that because a startup, and especially such a properly new startup. And so I was very fortunate. My first hire within the business was somebody I'd met just before I joined Cocoon, and she was previously at Farfetch, and therefore I knew she had great experience, and she'd gone off to do a master's, and she'd interviewed me for a dissertation, and I just went, when
mental note.
And so, however, the big challenge has been lack of structure, lack of time to hire. When you don't have an HR team or that sort of thing, I really lean on the rest of the team to help bring good people in, and I love having, whether it's whatever size, one of the things that I think is so important is peer interviews. It is so much bringing someone in, you're interviewing them, but they very much, as a company, you are being interviewed, because I think the right kind of talent need to also make that decision that that's where they want to land, as much as us wanting them to come in. So I do lean on the team, but I would say the quality of talent in terms of applications that we've had since the Kering announcement, or the investment in that Kering has joined, that has improved certainly, and that's in part, and we will continue to see that. The other thing is, when you're hiring for a startup, you need someone who brings a different set of skills that you would need necessarily in a larger business. In a larger business, it's a lot more about how do you collaborate with lots of different colleagues? How do you work within a matrix organization? How do you manage up when you have got 10 or 15 different stakeholders? How do you cross collaborate? In a startup, the idea is more, how can I be 3 things at once? And when I say 3 things, I mean, how can I be strategic? How can I be tactical? And how can I probably do something that's not within my remit? And how can I do this all whilst the business is changing? And we brought someone new in, and I was talking to her, and I was saying, this is the org chart now, and this is what it's going to look like in 3 months' time. And she was like, oh, isn't that too many people? And I said, well, in 3 months' time, the business needs to be X many times bigger. And she was like, oh, well, then that seems like the right the right amount of people then, and so people who can really work within that environment. And one of the things, I would say, it's a hard place to be. It's not easy. And so it's a skill you will certainly take with you into a different environment once you've worked in a startup, but being able to be adaptable and flexible, but still very focused on your deliverables is a skill that you need within a startup. And it's hard to come by. A lot of people like comfort, or they like the rigidity of, this is my job and these are the next 3 years that are planned out for me. I hired a lovely young woman who had come from working in she was the early part of her career, and she'd come from working within very large multinationals. And she'd said to me quite early on, she said, what is my progression plan? And I was like, well, work really hard and then we can have that conversation. And that's unfortunately, and I say that slightly flippantly, but it is just when you go work in a multinational or a large business, you know that if I do X, I will get Y and then Z. And that's how my career and my progression is going to grow. And with the startup, there is just, the team need to believe in you as the leader, because there is no other blueprint. And so you need to be able to sell them on the vision of, this is where we're going to be, because they have nothing else to go on. And so that, I think, has been, when you talk about hiring the team, people who, I look for people, yes, that are competent and qualified, but that attitude of that they're going to bring with them is so much more important, because that desire to just make it work and be independent, but still, and communicate well and all those sorts of things, because you're just all running so fast and knowing, okay, how, Ceanne, what do you need me to tell you, and then what can I just get on with, is so different. The other thing is, we work with a group of consultants, and that is also a different dynamic, and my preference is to have more people in-house than out of house, just because I think for me it allows me to be able to give people more responsibility and autonomy. But overall, I think it's how you implement that culture along the way is really, really key. And people are either going to love it or find the lack of structure that comes with it.
I think as humans, we really seek out the certainty, and chaos and unpredictability are so challenging for humans, more to some than others. There's others who are much more comfortable with, uncertainty. And I think during the pandemic, this really goes to show who is really, really uncomfortable with it and who can kind of deal with it. And actually just thinking about, being in a startup, the only thing you can, and interesting how you point out that you are the individual, this certainty that gives, other people the belief. And it's like, that's the vision, because everything else, there is no structure. You don't know what day to day is going to be like. You don't even know in like 3 months' time, the structure of the business, how it's going to be, how, you're figuring things out as you go along, because that's the nature of a startup. And so, you need people who, well, as a founder, you need to be like, have a strong vision saying that's the certainty. This is what we're aiming towards. But everything else, you have to be comfortable with that.
One of the things that I've learned is, like you say, humans don't like change. And they actually, the vast majority of people would rather be in a space where things don't change too much and there's as little chaos. And what my job is to make people as comfortable in that space of change. And I do tell people, the thing that you can be absolutely certain of is that things will be different in 6 months' time. So have faith in, like, I'm trying to give you as much warning that things will continuously change and adapt. And so that is something that you have to work around, because psychologically it's not a space that most people are happy with. And the pandemic did make it worse, and it did make it harder for people to deal with that. I think there is a certain type of profile that enjoys and does thrive within change and can navigate through it. And that's what you have to find. You have to find those people. I like when I meet someone and I try and go, especially if they're young and starting out in their career, I try and not collect people, but go, you're someone I want to follow because I find you so interesting and fascinating. But also, if one day I can hire you, even better. Because just in terms of how they present themselves in a particular way, I also look at our business and go, this person is going to be amazing now. Whether or not they're going to be amazing in the business in 2 or 3 years' time is questionable. And that's one of the challenges as a founder. And I've seen, and I can now say that because I've had the experience of the growth that I've seen within Vestiaire even, and the changes that I implemented when I was there. But even prior to that, the way the business grew at the Outnet and changed so much every 2 years was vastly different to the 2 years before that. And so knowing that not everybody is going to be right for all stages of the company, and that's okay, right? And how, as a leader, you make that okay, because sometimes you have to say, this relationship is no longer working, and do it in a way where both parties walk away and have that mutual respect is a hard thing. It sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't.
Would you say that's the toughest thing about being a founder, CEO?
Yeah, I think that one of the toughest things is certainly, it's that idea that you've got to, as much as possible, keep that wall up and knowing where the vulnerability can be. But the other side of it is making those tough calls. How do you, when it comes down to people, and it can be staff, it can be consultants, but say you're just not getting the vision, and unfortunately, if I don't push this vision through, we're just, it's you're stopping us from moving forward. And I had this conversation with someone last week, and in terms of when is that right time, how do you know? And you never want to be in the position whereby your lack of action caused the company to not succeed. Because even whilst you're a founder CEO, I have investors, I have people who are counting on me to deliver. If we don't deliver as a business, you can't pay salaries. There's all those sorts of things. And so, even as the leader of a company, you still are essentially working for everybody else.
There is always a boss somewhere.
Right? Even when you're the boss, you have a boss. And sometimes that's just in terms of your investors or your board or even your staff in a way. And so it's this idea of you have to make those tough calls in order to make sure that you are doing your job, which is driving the business forward. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, a lot of people were forced to make those tough calls. Hopefully, when I've made those tough calls in the past, I've been able to do it whereby, I still receive Christmas cards from, someone who I early on had put in that position. But it's really tough, and people can not always appreciate that it's the best thing, right?
What was the hardest decision you had to make?
The hardest decision I've had to make, I would say that's come down to previously it's been when I've done a significant reorg and had to make redundancies and cut people out of the business, and people who'd been there for a long time. That can be really, really challenging because that they are so passionate about the business and care. And when it's the end of their journey, that's what can be really tough. For me personally, it's been to walk away from some roles when you really want to. But you know that you know, for whatever reason, it's just not the right time. And I think that also comes with, you know, I'm now very much of the belief that you staying in a company for too long, whether it's you as an individual or having the wrong person in the role, very much prevents the right person from coming in or the right experience from opening up. And so I'm fairly philosophical about that. And I used to get, certainly, for example, you know, when I was at the Net-a-Porter group, we, especially for those of us that were there for a long time, you sort of almost forgot how to see a world beyond that. And so for a lot of people, leaving the business was emotional because you cared so much about building it.
Invested so much into it.
Exactly. But also, you know, it was absolutely the right decision for me and, you know, for so many other people when they left. And I think now I'm so much more philosophical about when people within the business leave, and you know, often people, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, don't apologize for resigning, because you are doing the right thing for you. And if you are not in the right place, if an individual is not in the right headspace for a business, they're not contributing to the business in the right way. So there's never going to be that.
It's like any relationship, isn't it? It's like what you were saying about if your heart is not in it, or you wish you were somewhere else, it's preventing you from living to your full potential, but it's also preventing someone else who might be exactly the right person for that from coming in and stepping into that.
Exactly.
And it's so important.
And as the leader within the business, for me, I want everybody to feel as though, yes, they're responsible for the customer, but they're also, their colleagues are their customer. If your role is not necessarily customer facing, your colleague is your customer. And so if your heart is not in it, you are not being the best version of yourself at work. Most likely the quality of your work is not up to par, and therefore that creates a challenging
and the whole team
environment.
Suffers because when you see that, it's also, it has an ability kind of to spread, doesn't it?
Yep.
Because it affects other people. And it's just that energy when you're talking about, you have to be the vision, you have to exemplify that, people to look to you. So if there's something that's draining your energy from that, it's impacting everything.
Yeah. And there's also a management theory about how you will sometimes have these superstars in your team that are really high functioning 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time they can be quite destructive and challenging. And how do you balance that out to ensure that what people aren't focusing on is their negative behavior? And how do you keep that in check? Because there is, unfortunately, what can happen within an organization is that the negative speaks louder than the positive sometimes. Yeah. And so my role also is to ensure that we don't, we have the right balance. And that's part of building the right culture, because you want people to, it sometimes only takes one bad apple to come in every day, be super grumpy, be late every day, that sort of thing, to then for everybody else to think, oh, that's how we should be behaving. And that's what you also want to stem in order to create that positive mindset.
What's your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is being unsuccessful, I would say. And that's in the sense of, that you work so hard you work so hard and then it's all for nothing. Because I don't mind, I think failure is so important in trying, and not always succeeding is fine. I think it's important to make a few big mistakes, hopefully not too big, but often junior people come into the company and they'll do something and you'll be like, no, you sent the wrong parcel out. No, something, but for the most part, it's something that can be rectified. And often if you make a mistake, you yourself will put in place and you will self-regulate. And so I think that idea that you can fail and it not be the worst thing in the world,
end of the world,
it's really important. I think for me, my biggest fear is doing all of this and it amounts to nothing. I think that's where it's
the certainty part again, isn't it? It's like knowing that there's going to be, a certain end result.
Yeah. And look, although at the end, I think it's, one of the things I would say the pandemic has taught me, and certainly having COVID myself taught me, is that sometimes you are riding a wave and things are just outside of your control. Yeah. And so you've got to get really comfortable with riding a wave and knowing what you can control and what you can't, and that you will get to that end destination one way or the other. And how can you focus on just make sure that ride, what can you control of getting to that point? And so that for me, how do we influence what we are doing every day? Because, for example, when you're working in a startup, there's so many things around that you just cannot control. And especially probably more things that I can control. But if you're a junior within a team, there are so many things that you cannot control about what's going on in the business. So how do you always show up knowing these are the things I can control? This is how I can do my part of my job in the best possible way. And so, of course, if there are things that aren't successful at the end of the day, and to that point, I'll be fine, we will all be fine. But for me, I think that's what motivates me to work hard, is to make sure that the business has the most chance of success.
What's been, talking about mistakes, like what's been your biggest failure, mistake?
I would say my biggest failure and mistake has been not leaving a role at the right time in the past. There was a particular position that I'd been in, and I'd been in the company quite a while, and I felt it was time to go. And my husband said to me, no, don't, stay a little bit longer, for various few reasons. And actually not leaving when I knew it was the right time to leave has meant that my headspace probably wasn't in the right space. And therefore, not that I burnt any bridges, of course, but that I just felt that it didn't benefit me or my career staying that extra amount of time.
How much longer did you stay?
Probably a good 9 months longer than I would have wanted to.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because obviously as a headhunter, I'm talking to people to get them exactly at that point where, they're ready to consider the step, but maybe it's still too, they still have maybe a little bit of room left, but, it's kind of moving on to the next bigger thing when there's certain conditions that are just not being met. And knowing when the right moment is essential, because, sure, you can stay somewhere, but, as with leaving anything, when you're talking about, somebody in your business that's not performing or it's just not happy, it's not the right place for them, just freeing that energy and putting your energy into something that you're really interested in, and then you can withstand the difficulties because you really believe in that. Yeah. And what 3 pieces of advice would you give your younger self?
The 3 pieces of advice I'd give my younger self is continue to have the belief that it will all work out. The thing that I would say is that is speak up for yourself more. I think earlier on in my career, I was very good at working very hard and perhaps less good at making my accomplishments known.
So is this idea of like respecting your needs?
Absolutely. I think absolutely respecting your needs and making sure that your work is recognized. I worked for someone who was very good at talking and making her achievements being recognized. And fair play to her, right? You can learn a lot from that. What was really interesting is I had coffee with one of her peers after we'd all, no longer worked together. And he said to me, it's really interesting that so-and-so was getting all the glory and you were doing all the work. And so I think I would say work out how to, whether it's raising your profile or getting recognized for your accomplishments, take that time out, because sometimes you're so focused on doing your task. Take that time out to say, I just did X, Y, and Z, and I'm really proud of those accomplishments. And how do I make sure that other people are aware of my accomplishments? That is something I would say, and that's a piece of advice I give to anybody I speak to or mentor. How can you talk about what you've just achieved? And say what worked well, what didn't work well. Be able to talk about that is a skill that you will need as if you want to get more senior within your career. And the third thing is try and plan it out more. I've been very fortunate that I have been presented with fantastic opportunities that have fallen into place at the right time. And I have also been discerning about what opportunities I haven't accepted. But also when I was younger, because I never thought I'd be in the UK for 21 years, and for the unforeseeable future. But I hadn't thought that I would be starting a company here and building all of that up. So especially for my 20s, I was just not really focused on building my career, but rather gaining experience. And so the mindset I had at early part of my career was quite different. So that's where I would say try and plan a little bit more. I'm always so impressed. Whenever I speak to a 25-year-old who goes, and I've done this, this, and this, and this is my plan, and by 30, I'm going to do this. And then and I'm like, I'm so pleased you have a plan. Just remember, life doesn't always work out.
It's balancing always the polar opposite ends of the scale. On the one hand, you don't want to over-plan because you just want to get started.
Exactly.
Because if you plan too much and you just never actually get around to doing it properly. And then on the other hand, not having any idea whatsoever and just sort of starting with no idea where you're going. So you're just kind of balancing that out.
Yeah.
And I guess one more question, and this is something I got from, again, Mark Goulston, and I think it's a really difficult question, actually. It's like, what seems impossible to you now, but if you can make it happen, will change the course of your life or your business?
I think the thing that I know will happen, but at the moment it is just impossible, is just the luxury industry's acceptance of circularity and sustainability and implementation as important as revenue and profit. And they can be such polar opposites, and sometimes it's very easy for us to sit and say it's something that must happen. Sometimes the people that shout the loudest have made their money in businesses that have not had circularity at their core. However, we just have to get comfortable with that. And I know it will shift, and it has to. However, we're still a long way off. And so the adoption of circular business models widespread by the industry has to happen. It will happen, in the same way where 10 years ago we were talking about luxury brands selling direct to consumers on websites with fairly novel, right?
And look at us now.
Look at us now. Some of the best web experiences and digital experiences are being driven by luxury brands themselves. And so, I know it will happen. And some days it just feels a long way off. But for us, and in terms of our Cocoon and the business, that's going to be a real game changer for us.
Definitely. I love that. And Ceanne, thank you so much for coming onto the show and for speaking to me. And I have so many other questions that I feel I can talk to you for hours.
Thank you so much,
But
Maria.
it's such a pleasure. And, I love your journey and talking about female role models and, what the investment means and actually the industry as a whole. And, what you're doing is just so admirable. And I wish you all the best. And
thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to come to your home and
such a pleasure.
To speak to you in person. I know we've been speaking for quite a while now over the phone. And so it's fantastic to finally be able to do this in person.
Thank you. Really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks a lot, Ceanne. Thank you so much for joining us here on Anatomy of a Leader. I hope our guest leadership journeys resonate with you and make you feel like you too can take on the world. Please subscribe so you can be alerted when new episodes are released. Comment, like, tell a friend, share on social media. I'll make sure to support you there as well. And let me know what inspired you, the changes that you've made, and how you too succeeded against all odds. You can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn with the handle MariaHVO, or just search for my very long surname. And if you're hiring leaders to take your business to the next level, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Again, that long surname. Thank you again for being here on Anatomy of a Leader. Bye for now.